Hello and welcome to the Chromatic Podcast, where I bring you a fresh coat of innovation, ideas, and insights from top experts in business, arts, and culture. I'm your host, Craig Bundren of Bundren Painting, and the creator of the Bundren Building Arts Foundation. Today's colorful guest is Piper Faust. Piper's someone who I find extremely interesting and has a background of being enmeshed in public art. She's a connector, a liaison, and a project manager. She's basically the embodiment of everything we're trying to accomplish with the Bundren Building Arts Foundation. Today, we're going to discuss why art matters, and especially in these times. But first, I'd like to find out a little bit more about Piper, so let's cut right in and get rolling. Welcome, Piper.
Hi, Craig. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be talking to you about public art.
I'm really excited you're here. You have a really interesting background. Piper and I have worked together on a project years and years ago in downtown Houston. And that's basically where I found out about Piper through one of our project managers and her mission to bring public art to everyone. And looking through your website and all these projects that you've been in on and in charge of, it's really cool. I mean, it's really,
Thank you.
Really neat stuff to look at. I come from a painting background, but looking at all the different mediums of art that you've been involved in and the things that you've put together, it's really exciting. To start out, what brought you into art? What got you excited about that in the first place?
Well, I've always had an exposure to art. You know, my mom studied art history. My grandfather was an artist. I went to TCU, Texas Christian University, for undergrad, and I did not study art there. I had the opportunity to move to London briefly after I graduated to do an internship. I interned for an architecture firm, and it was while I was in London that I spent a lot of time at the Tate Modern, which is a huge modern and contemporary art museum in London. And there is a room there dedicated to Mark Rothko. It was a Rothko room, not dissimilar from the Rothko Chapel here in Houston. And I was just blown away by it. And I would have to say that was a turning point where I was like, you know, I love this. And I can't even explain exactly why, because art can be such a personal experience and, evoke such emotion that sometimes you just can't explain it. So shortly after that, funnily enough, I ended up, my internship was only like 6 months. So I ended up moving back to Houston and I got a job at the Rothko Chapel. So while I was there, I was the assistant to the director, you know, a very entry-level position, but as part of my position, I had to docent the chapel at least one day a week. And, you know, the chapel is, to me, it's just beautiful and so moving. And I spent that time while I worked there writing, basically, because I didn't have an art education, writing a dissertation in order to apply to graduate school to study art history. So that's kind of where things for me took off. And I was accepted into Sotheby's Institute in London, and I moved back to London and I studied, I was in the contemporary art program, which was such a fantastic program. We traveled, you know, all over Europe. And obviously when you're in London, you have the exposure to amazing galleries and public art. And, you know, you can just get on the train and go to Paris and go to the Pompidou. And there's so many opportunities there. Specifically, I got into public art because my advisor was a public art curator. And I ended up being very drawn to the work that she did. And we had a lot of discussions about what public art means and how it differs from commercial, your typical like gallery operations and that sort of thing. And then my final dissertation for grad school was about, you know, providing service in public art projects, like community art projects. And then right after I graduated, I began working for that other architecture firm that I interned for, and they hired me to work with them on incorporating art into their developments. So long story, still long. I ended up moving back to Houston, and I worked for the Houston Arts Alliance and their civic art program. And that's kind of where I got the basis of public art project management and really began to understand the process of your typical civic art projects.
That's what really excites me. The fact that you have such a connection with what's going on in Houston with museum curators, with the artists themselves. You're obviously a wealth of knowledge and experience. You've had so much experience putting on and putting together these projects. What's your favorite medium? What's your favorite project to work on, or project type?
I mean, that's kind of a tough question, honestly, but I really gravitate towards projects that actively engage their audience. Make your participation in that project completes the project, if that makes sense. And I'll give you an example.
Do you mean like functional art?
Not so much functional, but more experience based.
Okay.
So I think one of my favorite projects that I have been a part of was when I was also with Weingarten Art Group, and our client was Discovery Green, and we did a project with a Canadian-based group called Daily to Le Jour. It was a site-specific commission specifically for Discovery Green's promenade, where they have these over 100-year-old oak trees, and we know that in Houston that's very old. Right. And they created this interactive project that basically they were arches, jumping across the promenade, and at either end it had what is essentially a megaphone, and you would speak into this megaphone, and let's say the title of the project was called Hello Trees. So let's just say you said hello trees into this megaphone, and then what would happen is this light would go off on one of the arches, and it would travel down the arch, and it would hit the bottom of the arch, and it would make a musical sound, and it would slowly transform your voice into music. So you would hear yourself talk, and then as you would slowly walk down, you would hear your voice transform into music. And then there was also a lighting component. And if you hit someone on the other end, this reaction would happen where it would be like, and the light would kind of go crazy.
From both ends, you could speak at the same time, so it would meet?
Yeah. And it was a meet. So, I thought that was a really powerful project. But, the Jessica Stockholder in downtown Houston that we worked with Bundren on, how cool is that to, cover everything within this certain trajectory with paint. And we used a lot of vinyl to cover everything it touched. We put vinyl on the trash can. So a thing like the Jessica Stockholder painting project doesn't exactly have an action, so to speak, but it can be so moving. Anything that just transforms your perception of a known space as well, I think is very, very exciting.
You've also mentioned in other conversations that we've had that you really like temporary art. Why do you like things that have an expiration date?
Because I think I think that there's something really exciting about bringing a very cool artist on board to create something for a short amount of time and making it a moment in time. So you really have to go out of your way to see it, because it's not going to be there, and you experience this happening or this involvement in this art project, and then it's gone. And I love that, because I think it keeps it fresh and new. And I think that when you develop temporary art programs, you're developing a following of like, well, what's next? And people are like, oh, well, remember when that was, or this cool mural was on the side of a building or on a parking garage. And now it's gone. I wonder if they're going to do a new one. And it's so cool when you do, and people get excited about it, and they come down and take photos, and they want to see it. It just doesn't grow tired, I think. And I think that's what I like about it. I like new, fresh, and and things, things get dated. I mean, ideally, if you're doing permanent art, you would try to seek something that is timeless. But sometimes you don't know what that is. So I think it's really exciting to keep things fresh.
I agree with you on that. It brings to mind when I was a kid, seeing the sculptures of the 80s. In the 80s, around a lot of the downtown buildings, they would put these big sculptures out in front of them, and they were really, really interesting. But as I grew up and would drive through downtown older, I would just look at them as I passed by, and they really weren't as much of the art to me, just because I had grown so used to them. So I think if you add urgency to things that are there temporarily, it causes people to say, well, I've got to go see that before it's gone. I've got to make the time to go out there. No matter what's going on in the world right now, I need to go make time to do this because there's a chance that it's not going to be there later. And even like pop-up cafes that people put in, these restaurants where they pop up somewhere and they're going to be open for 6 weeks, and then the lines are around the building for 6 weeks. And that if that was a permanent restaurant, the lines wouldn't be around the building for 6 weeks. It's this added urgency, and we've got to be a part of this. And the cultural thing too of we've got to be a part of this. I've got to be able to say that I was over here at so-and-so cafe, or we got to see this project when it was out. There was another project, and so many times I mention this to people in Houston, and they remember it, but it was a house over off Montrose that they called Inversion. And before they were going to tear the house down. And so they hired some artist, and the artist did their interpretation of it and basically turned the house inside out. And it was only there for X amount of time, and everybody took pictures, and then it was demolished. So those types of things excite me. And I think that this is a time where we can add more of those projects to the world. And maybe that's a way to help people that are going through, I don't know, through a feeling of lack or lack of art during this time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot to do right now. Now's a really good time to embrace public facing art. I think some museums are open, but you go at your own risk. Not all of them are open. Yeah. So, the more exposure to, this, and sometimes art can just like create a sense of optimism too, that in this time of that, just, it's just, you see people out there all the time, with different murals and taking photos, and, it's just like something, it just feels like something, anything right now, I feel like that makes us feel normal, that gives us a sense of normalcy is really important. And I think that art can definitely aid that feeling.
I think that that's an extremely, extremely good point. My wife and I were talking, I've taken some time off, and we were going to go to some museums, and looking through there, a lot of the museums that we wanted to go to are closed. And then the ones that you can go to during this time of a pandemic, there's a lot of rules. And we started talking about, well, maybe we'll go do the mural tour that they have in Houston. And they actually have an area where they've put out a map of the murals that you can do it. But there's also people that are doing tours of it where you get on board a bus and they drive you around. So obviously they charge for that, but you can do the same thing by hopping in the car. And Stacy was talking about, if we go look at these murals and we can go take some pictures and have fun. And it's getting out. It's getting back to that normal sense of life. Right now I find myself busy with work and being in the house, working from home, not seeing as many of the people as I want to see, or seeing that much of the city. So I think that those give great opportunities to go out in public and see these types of things.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
So during this time of pandemic and there's a lot of fear, the artist community, from what I hear, the thing that they talk about is that art is the first thing to go and the last to come back. And that art is also a very important part of society and life, kind of like what you and I were just talking about. So there's so many people that are suffering right now. These public artists, they're thinking, well, I can't get my medium out there. I can't, not only can I not express myself, but I'm still worried about doing the things that I love to do.
Right. Yeah. Obviously, this has impacted so many industries across the board. And I think that there is some truth to in many ways, art is kind of a luxury, right? It's not, or it can be viewed as a luxury. So like you said, it could be, the first to go and the last to come back. But I do think that I'm seeing a lot of positivity in Houston, especially, the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs and Houston Arts Alliance just released, I think $3 million worth of opportunities to artists. I want to say it's Texas based, and that's amazing to apply for airports. And, I'm also I pay attention to like kind of what artist calls are going out. And while things have slowed down, I think a lot of more of the private funding has slowed down, but like the public funds that were already in place, because Houston operates on a percent for art. So what that means is that 1.75% of vertical civic buildings is allocated directly to art. And so I'm seeing a lot of that actually across the country, that those opportunities are still around. And, I know I'm not an artist. I'm a huge advocate for artists, but I'm also the crazy person who, right before the pandemic started, left my job and decided to start my own thing. And, that's kind of nuts, but I don't know what it is, but I do think public art is going to change in some ways. I think all of us are going to change in some ways. I think the way that we operate, at least for the foreseeable future, how you go back to school, how you visit a museum, how you visit a park, all of that is transforming. So I also think in a lot of ways, it is kind of a call to think about that as an artist, as a creative, is like, how can we use this as an opportunity, as opposed to, just kind of sitting and being sad.
Right.
And that's challenging. I mean, I've had my days during this pandemic where I'm like, oh my God, but, I think that there's a lot of ways that we can think about, like, how do we engage the public? How do we engage specific communities? Maybe that's not how we usually do that. Maybe it doesn't, there's a lot of touch-based interactive art. Well, then how can if we can't really do that right now, people don't want to touch things that other people have touched, or you can't be in close proximity. Well, how do you create meaningful experiences and new experiences for people that demand that? I think it's a creative challenge. And in a way, I think it's exciting.
This reminds me of a conversation I've had before with another business owner, and I think it's amazing that you've stepped out during a time of pandemic. And anytime you start a business, it's an unsure thing. Business is scary,
sure,
but to start it, and not that you knew a pandemic was coming and hey, I'm going to start this here, but it adds challenges. But every time you add a challenge, you're adding opportunity. There's a list of companies that I hear in all these business things that I attend, of companies that started in recessions. And our paint company was started in a recession. Walt Disney was started in a recession. Procter and Gamble was started in a recession. And there's many, many more that I can list. But it's the fact that there's a monumental challenge in front of you. So you can't just step out and say, I'm starting this business. The tide is high and everything's working out and everything's going to be great. And all we have to do is throw whatever our product is out here and it's going to make it. Right now, it's really, really uncharted times. So you have to pay attention to the details. You have to pay attention to what's going on. You have to look for the opportunities that are out there. And all that's going to do is make you stronger in your business. You're going to be ready for all these things that are just thrown at you, and you will survive. You will build a much stronger business in a time like this. And I think that for the artistic community, it's the same thing. When art is the first thing to go and the last thing to come back, you have to create a way for it to come back. You have to be vigilant in what you're doing. When you're walking your dog in the evening and looking around and you see a silo or you see a building or an area of town. You sent me a picture of a gas station and you were talking about this art. And so it's an old gas station that's closed down and they've come in there and they've brought artists and they painted it with all these different colors and designs. So that happened because somebody saw that and thought either that's an eyesore, that's an opportunity. There was some thought to change what was there.
Mm.
And that was a really cool thing to look at. And it's 3D. To me, it's like I want to pull in the parking lot and go run around there.
Totally, right? I mean, it's so powerful. And you're right, is that like probably your average person would say, ugh, well, like, let's do something with that gas station, or they've got to sell it or develop it or something. And who's to say they probably will, but to look at that and see an opportunity is just so exciting to me. Like that's the kind of things I ideally want to be a part of.
I hear a lot of times people say that well, we don't have the time, or this isn't happening. And what's been told to me over a long period of time is that it's not a lack of resources, it's a lack of resourcefulness. And I think that doesn't fit anywhere better than public art, because if you're in the fourth largest city in the United States, you do not have a lack of resources. For public portrayal of art, it's everywhere. It's just a matter of finding it. And I don't mean this just from painted or just from anything that you set up, but I think from dance, from music, from any type of art, there is a platform outside that you can do this. This is going to sound ridiculous when I say it, so I'll probably edit it all out. But you could do a musical production on a roof of a parking garage.
No, that's not ridiculous at all. That's a great idea.
I know that they've turned, there's a place in Houston, I guess I'm throwing a plug for, Rooftop Cinema, where they did a drive-in on the top of a parking garage. Somebody saw that and thought, hey, what if I started showing movies up there? Yeah,
well, it's like that they've done, which is awesome, by the way. I've been there and it's a lot of fun. But, they turned that into, because of social distancing, they turned it into, not that location, but at Sawyer Yards at the silos. Now it's a drive-in. And they project the movie onto the silos, which is, again, like taking this, seeing this opportunity when one thing when a door closes. I mean, it's a little bit cliche, I know, but that's the kind of people like I want to be with.
That's the people I want to be.
So can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, in the same way, during all of this, you have decided to pursue this Bundren Arts Foundation. Is Bundren Arts Foundation a little bit in response to these times are tough and giving artists opportunities? Can I ask you to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. The foundation, I have a love for art. You said you're not an artist. I don't know if you're an artist or not. I know 100% I am not an artist in those type mediums of drawing or painting creatively. I can obviously paint things, but it came about from things like the Houston Arts Festival. Just seeing all these things, we would go there, my wife and I, and purchase. As I'm saying that, I'm looking around the room because I've got all this artwork in this room that I've purchased from different festivals. I loved going to the festivals and meeting artists, and then they would sign the back of the pictures, and there was just a sense of belonging to it, of being a part of it. And let's move to a bigger scale. The city of Houston is a city that I love. It's got so much. There's so many areas of Houston. You can live in Houston your whole life and still be surprised by the different people and the different areas and the things that are going on. I'm not a big proponent of graffiti, but you and I have discussed the Be Someone bridge that goes across, and that's been embraced by Houston. It's been something that not only has been accepted, but that is put out there as a symbol of what Houston's about. Houston has a message, and everybody agrees on that message. But the opportunity to help, I love to help people. So anytime that I can bring people together, I like to put deals together. So if it could be a deal that benefits other people, it doesn't have to benefit me. If I could bring you together with an artist and someone that owns a wall somewhere, that just makes me happy. So I wanted to be able to do that. And through the connection that I have with my paint company and networks of people, I'm able to do that. And then the time that I've spent speaking with you and the history that you have, the knowledge base, that excites me for the future, because I see you as a person that I can stay in close contact with, that has their hand on the the heartbeat of the artist community, and makes it easier for me to find those people and easier for those people to find me. So there's excitement. You've got experience in this. And so I look to that. So the whole foundation, it's one of those things. I just got really excited inside, if you couldn't tell. It's one of those things that it's a thought. The thought comes and you're like, wow, that is really neat. I would really like to do that. And then all of a sudden the universe comes in and goes, well, not only is it a neat thought, but it's happening. So here. Yeah. And it's almost like it's being spoon fed, and it's just going to happen. Whether I want it to happen or not, it's everything's going to show up to make it happen. And I've had other things in my life that have been like that. And I've found I have this little mantra thing of feather brick truck. And the universe speaks to you, and it takes a feather and it strokes your arm with this feather. Here's this idea. You're like, okay, that's really neat, and I'll think about that. And so you don't pay attention to it. Well, then here comes the next thing from the universe, and it's in the form of a brick. So it gets a little bit more of your attention. And then if you don't pay attention to that and act on what's being put forward, then the truck shows up. And the truck is very destructive. The truck will definitely get your attention. No. And I've had many times in my life where I've had to wait for the truck to show up to see things fall apart or this or that. And I'm finding that life goes a lot easier when I pay attention to more of the feathers. Mm-hmm. It was a very long answer to a very short question.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking me about that.
You know, I'm excited for Bundren Arts Foundation because it's just another avenue for supporting artists, and also, you know, showing, I guess, building owners how they can maximize what they already have, and, you know, kind of create a place or create a destination through the art that hopefully you'll be part of applying to their space. And I think that that's huge right now. I'm flipping through. You sent me a little pamphlet type thing that had been produced in 2000 and then I think redone recently about why public art matters. And one of the things in there is about the art adds value to buildings. And I think that that's a really interesting way to look at things. So you've got property owners that have the opportunity, they have the space to bring value into certain areas. We have examples here of different transitional areas in town where they've applied art and changed the whole area. The area over off of Navigation, mm-hmm. where you've got the Ninfa's restaurant, and mm-hmm. where they've added all the murals, and then they're decorating the esplanades. I mean, I think that's added to that community tenfold. Would you agree on that? Oh, absolutely. I mean, the East End is such a vibrant community as it is, and they're known, I mean, it's known for its murals, right? And then just to take that, you know, a step further and celebrate, use the murals to celebrate the community in the Second Ward, I think is very cool. And I think that also, you know, that the public art or murals has the, you know, power to influence how people see and connect with a place or with their community. You know, it can highlight what's unique about it, the culture of the community, and it can also be in some ways like a mechanism for people to better understand that community and what it's potentially about, in my opinion.
From the pamphlet that you sent me, some of the highlights where it said 70% of Americans believe that arts improve the image and identity of their community. And not only from decorating or improving what's there, but one of the things from Indianapolis was that 2 manufacturing businesses moved into an area to handle the demand of the fabrication for public art and employing people in the process. So not only were they just adding to the beauty of their community, they were actually adding business, adding financial,
adding to the economy for sure.
Right. Adding jobs to there.
Well, you know, and maybe that's like not exactly something that, you know, most people understand what kind of the process that goes into, let's just say, installing a sculpture, right? So, you know, you've got your you've got your artists, you've got your engineers, you've got your fabricators, you've got your, concrete foundation people, installers, landscapers. I mean, there's a whole economic system around the public art industry. And, especially if you're using local vendors, it's really, it's really important. You're pumping back into your own community, which I think is huge.
I think that when people walk into areas and art is around them, they maybe don't realize whether it's impacting them or not. They know that they feel good when they go to a certain area, but maybe they're not putting it to the fact that art is there. And then there's other people that just show up to that area because of the art. It's there. It makes them feel a certain way and they want to be associated with it. I don't think that a lot of people that are just in the public that are going about their lives and they're dealing with what happens in their daily lives don't really think about the art and the projects and what it takes to make that come into fruition, or the realizations that there are grants and that the city is putting money behind this. Obviously, the city wants areas to stay in good shape, good form, good fashion. They want the people that live within that city to be prosperous and happy. So there is an amount of monetary and other ways that they help. You're an expert on those types of things. So when you see areas that are in transition, what kind of things should people be looking for? Let's say artists that are starting out. What are the types of things that they can look for that are gonna help them to get art on a gas station or something of that nature?
Well, I mean, I think that you just have to be resourceful, and curious in a way. Like if you see something, for instance, a rundown gas station, like we were talking about earlier, find out who owns that property. There's so many organizations, including Houston Arts Alliance and Fresh Arts, and they've got it spelled out for you in some ways if these are grants or opportunities or funding opportunities. I know it's hard though, too. So, you don't blame it, but I do really think you have to be resourceful and creative. And, the biggest hurdle of anything is money, right? Funding.
Yes.
It is we have all these great ideas and it's how do we pay for it? How do we get in front of the right people? But a lot of that is just networking and, doing your research. And like I said, Houston has amazing resources for organizations that support artists.
I think Houston, I think you're 100% right. Houston has resources that are amazing, and the resources start with the people. Going back to the pamphlet that I was talking about earlier, it talks about artists as contributors. And it's 100% of public art is made by artists and other creatives. It's not typically corporations coming in and saying that. They may say that we want this here, but the art is developed by the people. I know that you put on the art calls and call within a community, study artist, and I guess, do they pick a theme that they want in an area when they want to install art? Is that the way that they go through and pick the artist? Or do they just pick an artist and whatever's artist vision goes in that area?
I think it totally depends on the client that wants the art, right? So if it's a percent for art project, there's a very specific format to how the artist is selected. There's a selection committee, and that includes stakeholders and things like that. But if you're working for let's say a private developer or an architect who, wants art to feel, or even in a neighborhood, in a community, wants it to reflect their community. I think there's a process that you work with the artists, with the stakeholders. You have a lot more flexibility, and it's a collaboration. And that's the other thing is, I think there are some artists out there that don't want feedback, and that's fine, but I would say a huge amount of artists that I've actually worked with are very open to feedback and to adjusting ideas according to the audience, according to the client, according to the site specifications. So, I think the decision and the selection process is very much a collaboration between, artist, client, art advisor, that hopefully can get you where you want to be as far as what that art is projecting, what it's putting out there of the feeling and the visibility, subject matter, all of that.
On your website, you said that you want to take the ego out of the art. What do you mean by that? Is that the nervousness that people have in trying to get involved with it? What is that?
Well, I think for some people, or a lot of people, that I like, for instance, even if you're just going from, I want to find a painting or I want to find a piece of art for my home. I'm starting on I'm not talking necessarily about public art, but this is just an example. I mean, I have a lot of friends and colleagues that just don't know where to start. They find it intimidating. It's intimidating to go into a gallery. And I think that's why I was drawn to public art, is because a lot of that ego is inherently gone, just because it is a little bit less of a, it's just the nature of it makes it less intimidating. I want art to be approachable. I want people to not feel intimidated or embarrassed or, well, I don't know about this. Because the other thing, it's so much of it is a matter of opinion, right? Like, I get really excited about certain public art or, even just certain artists that I would want to have in my house. And someone might walk into my house and see the artwork that I have and be like, well, that's crazy. Like, I can't believe you would buy that. You know what I mean? So it's so much of it is... Yeah, like so much of it is a matter of opinion, and that's okay. And quite honestly, that should spark a conversation. Like, absolutely. Why would you invest in that? Why would you like that? And then sometimes through that educational process of just like explaining, you're like, oh, okay, I can see the value in that. I can see where that's cool, So there's just like this like vision of, kind of a snobby art. I think even the word art advisor or consultant kind of sounds uppity in a way. That's just my opinion. And it does. And it's not. It's a blast. I mean, it's so much fun. I think it's the coolest job in the world. I mean, and obviously, I get to help people choose just really rad, interactive, colorful, exciting projects. And there's no ego in that. It's a blast.
So basically, it's more of removing barriers that are stopping people from being part of it and enjoying it. Exactly.
Because there's no reason why it should be barriers. And who am I to say something's bad or something's good? You know what I mean?
From personal experience, I think it's almost like people say get bit by the art bug or something of that nature. It's, for me, I didn't realize that it was inside of me until I found that piece of art that spoke to me. And then once I found that piece of art, there was a feeling. And I wanted to find that feeling more and more. And I just had no idea it was there. And I've mentioned before that I had this picture or painting that I bought at an art show. And it's put over the mantle in my house. And it's a rabbit. And it's a very surreal rabbit, and people would come in and say, "Oh, that's a cool picture of that crazy rabbit you have, or that's that weird rabbit photo or weird rabbit painting that you have." But then, as time went on, people started coming in, and I would get things of people would say, "What does that mean?" And I said, "I don't know what it means. I don't know, but it's beautiful and I like it." And then they would start giving me meanings. And everybody that would come through had a different meaning. Well, this tree in there is doing this, or these. It's got a tree and book and buildings, and everybody would pick up on different things. And I loved it. I loved that as much as I loved the painting, for the fact that people were coming in and giving me their interpretation of it, because all of a sudden it meant something to them. It just wasn't the crazy rabbit picture in my house, and maybe that's tearing down a barrier for people to see that they are in a few times, and it's not the crazy rabbit anymore. It's a representation of that. So that part's exciting for me as well.
It is. And so did that in any way inform or change your feeling about it? Anybody else's kind of input on what it was? Or did you see something, and did a friend of yours see something in that painting that you hadn't realize before.
Yes, actually. So visually, aesthetically, I just love it. It makes me feel good to look at it. But the painting is called 4 o'clock, and it's by Jay Long. And as some people mentioned different things about it, one of the guys said, there's a shadow in there. And it looks like that shadow would be thrown from 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I started looking at where the shadow was on the different things. Whether Jay meant that when he put in there, I don't know. But it's an interpretation. And it's something else to think about. So there were so many levels of this one thing to go into. And it's a painting it's a mixed media painting. So it's done on pages out of books. So the pages of the books were laid out on canvas. So you can, through the painting, read some of the words. So some of the people went up and would read little snippets of the page. And it's torn, so you can't have one continuous story, and it's all different books, but people were reading different parts and putting meanings to there. So yeah, it was just, you could get the same thing from brush strokes or whatever.
Totally.
But,
yeah.
Yeah. And once again, I get excited talking about that because there were so many more meanings other than I just knew that I liked it when I looked at it. So.
And that's all it has to be, in some sense. It's a feeling, and it's very personal by nature.
I agree with you. I think it is very personal, and people don't know what thing's going to speak to them. But the opportunity that public art gives is for people to not walk into somewhere on purpose. If you walk into a gallery, you walked into a gallery on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just within the city driving down a road and something pops out, that was just there. You didn't go seeking it. It showed up, and hopefully it has a profound effect. I was also reading more about art in hospitals. There's so many places that public art helps in hospitals and in different areas to just lift up people. And I think that if you tie that back into what we're talking about with the interpretations, when an artist puts something somewhere, they never know what they're adding to an area or to a community or someone's individual life.
Well, I think we probably read the same thing about the hospitals, but, it was, talking about how not only for the patients, but for public health workers, there's been studies done where it proves to reduce stress and provide a sense of belonging, and all of these things that you just wouldn't necessarily ascribe to art. You know what I mean? It's wow. So if if you're working in, and that's, it goes back to aesthetics, right? Obviously you feel a certain way if you're working in a white box with nothing on the walls, as opposed to a really nicely curated or designed office space. I think that just you're looking forward to going there. There's just such a different feeling, and just as basic as that, it just kind of is kind of a testament to the impact of aesthetics in general.
I want to start winding this down, but before we do, I want to talk to you a little bit about the business that you've started in the middle of a recession or pandemic.
Yes,
so,
both.
And I know there's fear there, but there's so much opportunity. And to me, it's exciting. And just to mention again, I think it's very exciting for me because you showed up with your new business in a time that we're moving forward. They just rhyme with each other. It's an opportunity for both of us to work together on some of these things within the city of Houston. But where do you see your business? I guess describe it a little bit, and where do you see it going in the future?
So my goal is to basically help or facilitate different organizations to create art programs, living, breathing, thriving art programs. And, it's really scary to do this. And it's really scary at the time that you're doing it, but it's so crazy because I feel so good about it. You know what I mean? I have no really good reason to feel that great about it. It's, all my kids are home from school. It's a bit crazy. And you really have to put yourself out there, which is not something that is natural to me. I'm not a very natural self-promoter. I don't mind being in the background and just kind of like doing the work and making it awesome and quietly being there. But this is definitely a change of pace for me where, you have to do a lot of networking, a lot of outreach, and and I also, when I say public art, I also mean that like, I really, there's public art in private settings, right? So, but visible. So, I'm really interested in working with parks to develop temporary art programs. I'm really interested in working with architects or developers or retail and kind of activating their spaces that ensure people come back, or stay longer. I love the direction that Bundren Arts Foundation is going. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for, to really make an impact and really think of things pretty creatively, like we keep going back to the gas station. It's like, or just looking at an object, or what the guys at Up Art Studio have done with the electrical boxes, all over town.
Yes.
Like, that's so smart. And it's so, anyway, so the other thing that I love about going out on my own is finding different artists that I want to work with and different organizations that I want to work with, and having the freedom to be like, okay, what can we do? How can we do this? And looking for different opportunities. And I am excited, and I hope that it does well.
I know you're going to do well. You're doing something that matters in a time that it really matters. So I think it's a perfect time to jump into this.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's going to be fun, and I'm super excited. And I mean, I'm a total public art nerd. Like, I will spend hours on Instagram looking up artists and projects and bookmarking and saving and being like, oh, this is, and so I love the city. I love Texas, and I'm excited to hopefully bring some more, vibrant, interactive things that you don't see everywhere. That's my goal. So thank you for asking.
So we'll put links in at the end of this, and probably links to some of the things that we discussed, because I'd like people to see some of those things. What's your website address?
It's www.piperfaustpublicart.com.
Awesome. And I've looked through this website. Everyone needs to go visit it. There's some beautiful images of some outstanding projects that you worked on, and people need to take a look at that to see what you're all about. There's a lot of talent there. It's really a cool site to go through. It's not one of those that you look through and you're like, oh yeah, this is whatever. I've looked through every project and read about it. It's very interesting. I also want to thank you for taking your time to come on here. I've very, very much enjoyed talking to you. I feel your passion in the things you talk about, and I'm very, very excited about what the future holds for you, your new company, and things that we can do together to help glorify and beautify the city of Houston. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Chromatic Podcast. You can learn more about what we're up to by visiting Bundren.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and rate and review it. Join us next week for more insights on business, arts, and culture.